When viewing events, especially events of biblical proportions, it's important not only to understand the what of those events, but also the why of those events. I'll give you kind of a more worldly example and then a biblical example. First example is this. Imagine a family is out on a walk on a beautiful summer afternoon. And all of a sudden, as they're crossing an intersection, the little sister is out in front and the older brother is behind her. And he decides that all of a sudden he's going to run and he's going to tackle her onto the sidewalk. And at first the parents are like, what just happened? But then they realize something. As they see it from a different perspective, they realize that a car was racing towards their daughter and their son had raced over to push his sister out of the way. It wasn't an act of violence, it was an act of vigilance on his behalf. Now for a biblical example. On the very first Easter afternoon, there were two disciples walking the road to Emmaus. You remember them. And they had just experienced all of the highs and lows of Holy Week. They had seen Jesus as he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. They might have been there as he preached and taught in the temple. They might have been there at a distance on the night that Jesus gave his body and his blood in with and under the bread and wine for the forgiveness of sins in the Lord's Supper. They no doubt had heard about what had happened that night in the Garden of Gethsemane, as the soldiers and the Jewish leaders came and captured Jesus. They knew what had happened to Jesus as he was put on trial. He was convicted, he was crucified, and finally his dead body was taken down from the cross. But they had a hard time understanding the why behind those events. You see, these men had been looking for a very different kind of Messiah than Jesus actually was. During their time, their culture really influenced them to look for more of a political Messiah, someone that would come and drive out those hated Romans and restore and usher back in a time of just prosperity like that of the Davidic kingdom. But now this man that they had placed all of their hopes and their dreams in was dead and buried, and it was now 3 days since that had all taken place. And so on this Easter afternoon, when all of a sudden Jesus walks up beside them, they don't recognize him. Why? Because he wasn't the kind of Savior that they were looking for. And Jesus, remember the way that he deals with them? He calls them foolish and slow to believe. And then he goes on and he continues to walk with them. And as he does, he explains to them from all of the Old Testament scriptures, beginning with Moses and the prophets, all of the things that were written about himself. Can you imagine that? Having a Bible class with Jesus about Jesus. And all of a sudden, they approached the little village of Emmaus, and Jesus acted as if he was going further. These two disciples invited him in to stay for the night. And it was then, and finally then, as Jesus took bread, he blessed it and he broke it and started to give it to them, that they recognized him. Their eyes were opened in the breaking of that bread. And they finally understood the why of everything that had taken place over the last few days, really over the last 3 years of Jesus' ministry. But Jesus disappeared from their sight at that moment. But these men finally got it. All of the puzzle pieces, all of the ways that they had been misinterpreting who Jesus was, it finally became clear. And they realized he's alive. And this means that the very thing, his suffering and death that we saw as a defeat is actually the greatest victory the world has ever known. And so with joy in their hearts and praise on their lips, they raced back to Jerusalem to tell the rest of the disciples, he is alive. Their entire perspective on what had happened during Holy Week changed because not only now did they understand the what, but they also understood the why. My dear Christian friends, as you witness to your Mormon acquaintances, think about ways in which you can help them understand not just the what, the events of the Bible, but why those things happened and what those things do for them this day and always. Blessings as you go and share the news that Jesus is alive.